You're 60 years old, married, and you've accumulated $1.6 million in retirement savings. And you're getting the itch to stop your work journey, and so you're wondering, how do I create a retirement plan? That's what we're going to cover in our video today. Hello, my name is John Vandergriff. I'm one of the owners and the wealth planning team lead here at Blue Ridge Wealth Planners, where we help people make the transition into retirement, answering this very important question of how to create a plan that is unique to them and their retirement journey. So as we go through this today, we're going to go ahead and jump into kind of the thought process. At any time, you can see the link below if you want to schedule a time to talk to us. I'll talk more about that at the end. But as we look at this, how do we create a plan for retirement? I like to compare this to the same way that you would go about building a house. Because again, if you've never built a house, you probably understand the concept, but there is an order of the way that you do things and what happens whenever you do things the correct way. And so obviously, as we know, the most important part of any building or house is the foundation. And so as we look at this, that foundation is going to be the goals or objectives, or in some cases, maybe even the concerns that you have about your future. Those are the things that we have to understand first. So as we look at this video, we're going to throw some goals and objectives in there just so we have some talking points, but your goals and objectives that are unique to you should be driving all the decisions that you make about planning above that. So very important, if you sit down with a professional, you understand what those are, because that's going to dictate everything that needs to happen after that. So we've got to understand those goals and objectives. That's where we are going to see those start to come into what we call a plan for everything. And again, as we look at this, it's not everything, but it's going to be the 5 areas that are in a retirement plan. So we will unpack these as we go, but how you go about drawing and providing the income that you need for your retirement, how you go and invest your money to be able to both provide maybe some of that income, but also make sure that you're taking the appropriate amount of risk for what you're comfortable with. Tax planning, how we help you strategize to keep as much of this money as you can legally. Healthcare, how we go about paying for maybe short-term healthcare expenses like Medicare premiums, but then also how we go toward long-term healthcare expenses, long-term care, making sure we provide that. And then as far as estate planning, we branch that out a little bit into what we would call a family or legacy strategy, because there's things that happen before both spouses pass, maybe one spouse passing, that have impacts to everything else here. But as we understand more about your goals and objectives, there should be real numbers that start to come out and dictate what type of moves and things need to be done in the way that you're making decisions now, but also in the way that you are currently positioned. So if those things aren't reflective of the goals, then they need to change, because as we look at it, you need to make sure you build walls and support structures for the foundation that is laid. So if those things aren't matching up, it won't take long before that doesn't work out to be a very good situation. So we want to make sure that the foundation, the goals and objectives you have, are dictating what gets built upon it. And if we do this correctly, we build a plan that allows us to have solutions for all 5 of these areas. What we're trying to find for the clients that we work with is what we call the 3 C's. And so as we look at this, the first of those C's is what I would call control. And again, this is not control as far as, picking certain types of stocks. Sometimes people give up that type of control and let us assist them with that. But it's how we control taking income, choosing the investments for the risks that we want to take, paying taxes. We need to have an understanding of what type of high-level controls we have so that we can make good decisions, but also understand what really are the important decisions that we need to make. If we have the right type of control, that should lead us to the second C, which is more confidence. Again, it's not good to be in a position where you're making decisions without confidence that they're working or moving toward what you want. Once we have a baseline of what we're trying to shoot for, we've got a plan that should give us more confidence. And then, as we look at the top here, the last C that we are looking to achieve is what we call comfort. You don't retire so that you can be stressed. You retire so that you can enjoy many years of labor and savings. And so how you are comfortable is going to be reflective of what type of planning that you're putting in place. So as we look at this, the first part, you may say, well, John, I don't know what my goals or objectives are. That is the basis that you need to understand. If you decide to talk to us or some other professional, you need to be asking yourselves these questions to make sure that you have a good understanding of what you're trying to make the transition into and what you want that to look like. So, as we said, too many people think about what they're retiring from, not what they're retiring to do. And so as we look at this, we want to make sure that we have a good understanding of what we want that retirement life to look like. What are the things that you want to do more of or continue to do? That's important to understand. You know, maybe you manage things yourself and you would like to do that with a portion of assets, but you want someone else to maybe help you manage the parts that provide your lifestyle. You know, it's also a dual question. What do you want to avoid? You know, again, are you wanting to avoid market risk, high tax increase, strategies to reduce the risk of that? We've got to look at this overall, and if we're asking these questions, we'll help you drill down inside of each of those. But these are some things that you can do now that can help you get started on the path today. So as we look at this, whenever we sit down with somebody for the first time, you know, whether it's on a virtual meeting or a whiteboard, we're trying to fill out, you know, these 5 areas plus the objectives and concerns. So as we look at this, this is a situation where, as we said, and I'm going to use a smaller marker here. So 60-year couple, they were looking to make a plan for retirement. And so the question that they have at first is, do I retire now or go to part-time work? And we're going to look at some of the impacts of that because that's an important decision to pay attention to. They also want to be in a position where they are not big risk takers, so they want to be able to make sure that they are able to do what they want to do, but also make sure they're not taking a lot of risk to their portfolio, like a 2008 type situation. Along with that, they have concerns in their future about how they provide healthcare cost. So again, obviously the short-term concern of that will be looking at the impact monthly for that bridge between now and Medicare if you retire before the age of 65. But then longer term, how do we position the assets to be able to provide what they need? And then as we look at the last one here, leave a legacy. So again, we look at this, that's going to be some combination of money going to children, but also money that could be going toward charitable causes. We'll talk about that in our legacy section. So looking at this, you know, this particular couple, taxes all factored in, they need $100,000 a year gross, so that includes taxes, to be able to provide both now and then inflationary increase in the future. And so with them being 60, they are not yet on Social Security, and so they could take that and make that decision at 2 years from now. You know, and again, when we talk about Social Security, the thing to keep in mind is this is not as simple as just quitting work and filing for Social Security. As we look at it, there are currently 2,728 rules inside of the Social Security handbook. Sometimes you're aware of the full amount of options you have, sometimes you're not. So again, it's good to get an understanding about where you're at. The key, though, is making sure that you make the decision that is based on you as an individual, not what somebody you know did, or your brother-in-law, or somebody that you Googled and found a spreadsheet that said this is the way to do this. You need to make sure that you factor in the things that are unique to you as far as age, life expectancy, health conditions, spouse, but then also the investment money that you have, making sure that it is set up to support the decision that you make. Because, you know, as we go back to this situation here, you know, with this person being 60, if they make the decision to retire now, they're going to provide or have to provide $100,000 of income for at least 2 more years from the savings that they have, and they need to be able to plan for that from the investments they choose so that they're not in a position where that 100 is dependent on coming out of the stock market. Market goes down, now they're in trouble and they're losing money at the beginning of their retirement, which is one of the bigger risks that you have. So as we look at this just at the beginning, normally we try to do the numbers as if they take Social Security at their first opportunity. So for this couple, it would be at 66, or I'm sorry, at 62. And so that would be $18,000 for spouse 1, $20,000 for spouse 2. So as we look at it, if they made the decision to file at that particular time, they would have about $38,000 of Social Security being provided. And so again, if we took that out of 100, then that would mean that they have $62,000 of need from their bucket as they look at it. The factor that we have to look at is obviously if they decide to do anything from a part-time wages perspective, we've got to pay attention to the impacts that this does to other areas, because let's say they get into a position where they work part-time, they like what they're doing, they want to continue to do that. Well, at 62, if you choose to file for Social Security at that particular time, your wage limitation before Social Security starts to get affected is a little over $21,000 per wage earner. So it's not combined wage income. If you have one spouse that's not working at all, the other spouse that is working and getting earned income, $21,000 and change is your limitation. So if they were in a position where, part-time wages was $20,000, that would bump up what they're getting short term, maybe make the decision for one of them to put off Social Security, the other to file if they wanted things to stay the same, or they could increase the amount of income and reduce the amount of distribution that they're having to take out. So, that's what we're looking at sometimes when we're making the decision between retire now and part-time. Again, sometimes it's a personal choice of if you find something that you like to do, you can kind of manipulate the income structure here to support what makes sense, because if you have something that makes $30,000, maybe that person doesn't need to file for Social Security yet, but the other spouse could. So we've got to understand, what components you have about your situation, what desires you want to do. That's going to impact the income. So what we're going to look at here, just for easier numbers' sake, is let's say they choose to retire now. And so the only income sources they have 2 years from now is going to be both of their Social Security payments. So $62,000 of need off of a retirement savings bucket of $1.6 million is going to be right at 3.9% rounded up. So again, we like to see this number be between 3 and 4%. So again, we're kind of at the top of that range, which as we look at this, and we start to factor it in, I'm going to zoom in here. So if our income need is 3.9%, let's assume inflation rates, you can really pick any type of number that you would like to use here, but somewhere between 2 and 4%, that's going to put you at a position where the growth that's needed is going to be somewhere between 5.9 and 7.9% annually. And so as we look at this, what starts to be a little bit of a concern for these people at 60 years old is not big risk takers. We may need to be in a position where either we have a larger component of this that goes toward the job of income production now so that we can have more money that is growth oriented later, or maybe we have more growth oriented positions that they are leaving exposed to the market. So we've got to make sure that we test this from a risk perspective to see if this is a thing that's doable for them, because they could potentially have, in the way that we run income, maybe till 95. So they could have 35 years of potential income need and inflation need. So it's either one of those where maybe we back down some of the inflation that we factor in long term so that there's not as large of a draw for longer off of their savings. Because as we look at this, we want to make sure that we pay attention to their maximum loss. We don't want to force someone to take more risk than they want to. Out of the way that they look at it, they would like to stay, really above $1.4 million. So somewhere around a 10 to maybe 12% would be their maximum downside loss that they would want to see. But as we look at this, the reason we want to pay attention to this risk is, as we said, concerns about health care. What you have in this bucket that's not being used to provide for your income is going to be money that could be used for healthcare savings and needs to be devoted towards some accessibility if it's more of a short-term need, or long-term you need to have invested aggressively to help you fight against inflation. So as we look at this, it's a good time to transition into just big picture-wise, from an investment perspective, what things we see most people need. Because as we look at this, growth, access, and protection are three things that we want from our money. Typically, two out of any of those three is best case scenario in any type of investment option. You cannot get all three of these in one particular place. But as we look at this, the challenge that most retirees face as they start to plan and make this transition is a majority, if not all of their assets are positioned toward growth and have been for a long time. And that's a hard thing to change because people fear they're going to miss out on potential growth. This particular couple is not necessarily that way because they're not big risk takers. But as we look at this, the things that we have to pay attention to here is that growth needs time and a willingness to take risks. So whatever money you have that is willing to be not touched for a long time and have risk potential to it, that needs to be devoted toward the growth job. That does not need to be money that you need short term, either access to or protection for. It really needs to be in a separate bucket because anything that we have on a growth mindset whenever you get to retirement are going to be those assets that are going to help you fight against inflation longer term. You know, markets may not provide for inflation short term, but longer term they will if market averages that have been around for a long time continue to happen like they always have. So as we look at this, we've got to make sure that we weight properly for the particular individual how much needs to be in access. So again, you need to look at how much money you need in emergency funds, liquid access for that doesn't have a lot of risk to it. But then, as we talked about healthcare, these are the type of positions you need to have accessible to you if you do have some type of health concern, your spouse gets sick, you need to be able to access those positions where they're fully available without penalty, and then also in a position where hopefully they don't have a lot of tax impact as well. And then from a protection standpoint, obviously, as we get closer to retirement, we don't want all of our assets risky, so we do need some in safety, but these are also going to be the type of positions that are ideal to draw income from. If you can have a safe asset, you don't want to be taking a risk on your lifestyle, and so you need to have enough money there to hopefully give you 10 to 15 years of runway to draw so that it buys time for the growth assets, and then you have money here for emergencies. So how that shakes out for every family is one thing that's unique to each one. There's no cookie cutter way to do this. So as we have this conversation with this particular family, we need to examine how risky are they now, how that lines up to where they want to be, but also how we appropriately weight the right amount of money here to provide this income need, both short term, but then also longer term where they have a pretty high percentage compared to where we like to see things. But still, 4% or less in most cases is doable. We just need to make sure that the other components are structured in such a way to really support that income need and really make the best decisions that we can. So now shifting up here, currently this particular couple is in a position where they're actually at $90,000 a year of taxable income. So as we look at this, their top tax rate is the 12% from a federal level. You know, if you're in a state that has income tax rates, you would need to add that on top there. We're in Tennessee, so we don't have to worry about that. Of this bucket, they have a majority of these assets, $1.4 million inside of pre-tax accounts. They currently have $150,000 in after-tax, and they have a small Roth because they've listened to people like us who talk about tax planning. They started doing conversions on their own before they met us, so they do have some money in tax-free positions that they've already looked at. So as we look at this, when we see families that have a majority of money there, one thing we want to pay attention to is where is our income now versus where it will be long-term. So as we look here, that's going to be the impact of Social Security over time, but then also as money continues to grow, required minimum distributions may force this family into a position where their income gets higher later, and if it does, then it gets them to a point where maybe their tax percentage increases. And as we look at this, even if their income stayed ballpark where it is now, we do want to pay attention to what moves we can make to take advantage of low tax rates as they exist, because in today's brackets, whether their income's at 90 or 100, they're in the position where their top tax dollar is at 12%. And if we compare that to the things that we know, which is what the brackets will be whenever brackets change at 2026, that 12% in today's money is now going to increase to 15 January 1st of 26 if things continue to go the way they are now. that's going to be roughly a 25% tax increase for this family on the money that's coming out of their IRA distributions. And so we want to be in a position where we're aware of that, but hopefully reducing and paying taxes, even if it's just on the dollars that are in the 12% bracket. That makes sense because we've looked at this a lot of different ways. The key is finding the time that you can leave the account, the IRA, the 401k, where the tax percentage is the least. And as we look at this, we know 12% will disappear if tax rates get to where they have been before, which this isn't historically the worst time, but we've seen taxes go all the way up to, for this particular family, anywhere from 16 to 21% in today's money, maybe even pushing into 24%, which 24% is a 100% increase in taxes on those dollars that are coming out of their IRA. So we want to pay attention to that to try to get the biggest and best use of those dollars when it comes to tax planning. Because the assumption that a lot of people make is your taxes are going to be lower in retirement. That may not be the case depending on what the government does, but also what they're making you take as far as required minimum distributions from your accounts. We just want you to be in a position where you're able to provide what you want and have it come as efficiently as possible. Because, as we look at this, this particular couple is in a position where, one of the reasons that they have a concern about long-term care or health care costs in the future, they do not have any long-term care insurance. And so currently the amount of liquid after-tax dollars that they have, which is a combination of their after-tax and their tax-free accounts, $200,000, which in this case is a little over 10% of their overall net worth. We want to see that increase so that they have more money that's available to them where they don't have to pay Uncle Sam every time they need it, or if they need a larger amount, it's not going to dump a lot of taxes on top of the income tax that they have in that particular year. So as we look at this, this is something that we want to pay attention to and try to increase of the total bucket there so that we can help alleviate some of the concerns. We also need to have a game plan because for their budgeting purposes, they have included increases in healthcare costs that they would have to make the jump into retirement or part-time because they're going to lose those health benefits and then maybe see a reduction on that, when they get to Medicare age. But again, assuming that things stay the same is the safest way to do it so that we're not counting on healthcare costs going down significantly when we don't actually know if that will happen. So as we look here, this is a family that each other they wanted to have as beneficiaries. As we looked at it, after each other, they actually were in a position where they were fairly charitable. So they had a third each go to each of their two kids. But then also their church, they wanted to have the third beneficiary if something happened to each of them. And again, as we look at this from an overall structure, having money that's in pre-tax accounts go to the church makes a lot more sense because that church will not pay taxes on that. They do have those beneficiaries reflected on their accounts, which we would make sure continue to happen if we did need to create new accounts. They do have estate planning documents complete as far as wills, powers of attorney. They do not have trust at this point, and so that would be something that we would look into depending on how they want these assets to go, because it could be maybe more of a benefit to them to give those assets to the church as they continue to go from a tax planning perspective, as long as it doesn't exceed the overall amount that they're really looking to give. And so as we look here, annual gift that they give to charities, is a tithe. So as they move forward, roughly $10,000 of that 100 that they are living on is going to be something that they would be looking to give away. So from a, as we said, tax planning perspective, you can combine charitable giving and tax planning to hopefully create a situation where you're getting credit for some of these assets, because the way things are now, standard deductions are $27,700 a year. That $10,000 of tithe is not enough to get where they get much credit for it. So if we can structure things in such a way where they're giving money that can hopefully reduce the amount of tax obligation they have, but also give them credit for some of the things that they're donating, that's what we want to try to use so that they can get a double benefit out of those assets. So as we look at this, again, you see a board here where we've essentially looked at, going back to our example, we've got our goals and objectives of what we're building on top of. We see what things need to happen in each of these areas for from a dollars and cents perspective. And then when we sit down with somebody, we're going to cover all of this in our first meeting. Our second meeting is what we call test and recommendations, because we want to test what you're doing now to see if it does in fact line up with that. Because sometimes, you know, to use our housing example, people have all the building materials, they just haven't structured a plan in a way to put things together and make sure it's organized and makes sense. So we want to test and see if you're on the right track now. If you're not, we're going to talk about what kind of adjustments may need to happen. That's where the recommendations come in, because for us as a company, what we do is we step in and create the plan. We also will assist in the investment management, structure the income plan, the tax planning. So we try to help coordinate a lot of this stuff for our clients and be in a position where we assist them with as much or as little help as makes sense for us to do. So as we look at this, if you've not been able to sit down with someone who does planning in such a way and this makes sense to you, we'd love to sit down with you and see how we can potentially help you, walk you through this discussion that we just did, obviously using your numbers specifically here, and really seeing what it takes to create a plan and give you, as we talked about, those 3 C's, which control, confidence, and comfort as you move forward from a planning perspective. So you're going to see a link below. I would invite you to schedule a time where we can have an introductory conversation here, see what things make sense, and then go from there. And then obviously, you know, if you have questions about what we talked about here, feel free to comment. We'd be happy to interact with you and answer any questions you have and see how we can help you with obviously this content we're producing. So with that being said, that's all we have for today. We look forward to sharing more with you in the future, and hopefully this makes sense to you.